Well guys, we decided to go on a harbour tours on the water bus and have a look around the harbour. So that should make life a little bit more interesting.
Thank you.
2 please.
2.
Thank you.
And 2. Thank you.
I say, how exciting. Super. There's our water vehicle. Looks like a bit of a bucket, but
seriously?
You got that door?
Yeah, I got a door.
Don't worry about it.
Put your coat on it, I don't care. Just sit your coat on it.
Put your coat on it.
I'm not sitting on the wick. What not?
Sorry.
Get race up.
Well, we're on board now. Just waiting for it to depart, and there's the big Isle of Wight ferry coming in. Or is it the French? No, probably. Don't know. It might be the French one. Oh, here we go. This is us moving. Oh, that feels funny. I hope he knows how to drive this.
Isle of Wight ferry behind you.
Remember, Captain, this isn't bumper cars.
Alright then, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, good morning and welcome aboard the Cap Stargate Harbour Tour. Well, as you can see, we have this step on Gunwharf Quays, we've made our way to the dockyard. Hopefully then we'll pick up a few more people and then we'll go around the Naval base itself. But as we get ourselves underway, here on the right of course is Gunwharf. Today obviously a big shopping centre, but that wasn't always the case. That's because this was in fact the former site of an area known as HMS Vernon. HMS Vernon was in fact a mine countermeasure base used to deliver torpedoes. That was until the late 1980s when the site was then left dormant for a number of years. Eventually was bought by a company called Barclay Homes. Barclay Homes transformed it into the site that we see today. Today, Gunwharf plays home to over 90 shops, restaurants, bars, nightclub and casino, but of course the main attraction here is the spinning tower. As you can probably tell, we're just about to pass directly underneath it. As you go under the tower, so you take a look up, you'll be able to appreciate the fine size of it, but you'll also notice the large glass floor. which at the time of construction was one of the largest glass floors in Europe, although it has somewhat recently been surpassed both on the Eiffel Tower and Tower Bridge in London. But nonetheless, if you're brave enough, providing you take your shoes off first, you can still walk across it, and in doing so, look down around 100 metres to the sea below. So just outside the Gunwharf is then Portsmouth Harbour Station. This is where you can catch a train to various different destinations around the country. It's also here that you can jump on board a white rider, such as number 2 here on our left hand side. On board White Rider 2, for example, you can travel from here in Portsmouth over to Ryde here on the Isle of Wight. But with a journey time of 22 minutes, they're actually only the second quickest way to reach Ireland. Fastest way is via the hovercraft. The hovercraft will actually fly you from Southsea to Ryde in under 10 minutes. And it is in fact one of the only passenger carrying hovercraft services left in the world. Right, ladies and gentlemen, so now very nicely brings us up to the stern and starboard sides of HMS Warrior. What we're going to see as we go around today will be on the right hand side. So that's looking towards the Warrior as we pass around her. So if you want to take this opportunity to move yourselves around, feel free to do so. We're going to be alongside till 1/4 past the hour, so for about 5 to 10 minutes. Load up and then we'll take you around the naval base itself. But looks things up here, it does seem fairly busy, so if you do want to take the opportunity to grab the best seats in the house whilst you can, feel free to do so. And we'll get you on your tour very shortly.
Apparently we've just pulled in to pick up some more passengers from the Portsmouth docks. So it might get somewhat busy. Do what, Tats? What'd you say? Okay. Well, this is our second lot of passenger pickup, so it could get a bit crowded from now on. There's an awful lot of people there. Time to get a good seat.
Right then, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, good morning and welcome on board the Solent Camp for the start of your harbour tour. As we depart from here in the historic dockyard, by law we have to brief you all on a very short safety announcement. Therefore, in the very unlikely event of an emergency, please remain calm, remain seated and await instructions from either myself or the crew. On board the vessel, life jackets are found underneath the seats at the forward end of the saloon, as well as inside the life jacket boxes on both the front end and top deck.
You're sitting on
how to don these can be found in various locations throughout the vessel. A life raft on the top deck, these will be launched by the crew, and instructions on how to board them will also be given. Throughout today's tour, feel free to move around the boat. Just do appreciate though, we are liable to sudden movements.
Well, that gives you a little vote of confidence.
Also kindly ask in the interest of your own comfort and safety, please do not stand upon any of the seats, lean too far over or climb upon any side railings, and for any young children on board, please ensure they do not run around the vessel. Now throughout the trip today folks, the bar will be open in the lower saloon, we serve an array of hot and cold drinks as well as light refreshments. So if you do fancy anything to eat and drink on the way around, feel free to visit either Steve or Jake behind the bar, and they'll be more than happy to serve you throughout the tour. So ladies and gentlemen, as we back our way out of the historic dockyard, we are going to be starting our tour by looking over our right hand side, or the starboard hand side of the boats, which is by looking towards HMS Warrior. So if you can't see the Warrior, you might want to turn yourselves around, because most of what you're going to see on the tour will be looking in that direction. So the Warrior herself, she was built back in 1850, are the largest and most expensive warships ever owned and operated by our Royal Navy. After all, they cost a whopping £3.1 billion each. Well, in terms of the size of the carriers, generally with ships, their size is often determined by how heavy they are. The aircraft carrier here weighs in at 70,000 tonnes. Therefore, on paper, makes her 3 times the size of our previous Invincible class of aircraft carriers. To be slightly more specific though, they're 280 metres long, 70 metres wide, and there's then about 10 metres of the ship located below the waterline. For all intents and purposes, this is about as physically large as possible that you can get into Portsmouth. Any bigger, you struggle to get through the harbour entrance directly behind us. But out of our 2 aircraft carriers we have in service for the Navy, the Queen Elizabeth here today is the old one of the 2. She arrived in Portsmouth for the very first time back in 2017. Her sister ship arrived in 2019. But over the past couple of years, both carriers have been undergoing a wide variety of training in France, trying to get themselves ready for what is otherwise known as frontline duties. Frontline duties is basically the process in which the aircraft carriers go into service for the very first time. Well, the first carrier of the 2 to go into service was the Queen Elizabeth here. She entered frontline duties about a year ago, last Easter. She then spent 7 months out on deployment under NATO, travelling all around the globe. She returned to Portsmouth just before Christmas time. So she's spent the past couple of months now here in Portsmouth. She's undergone a bit of aircraft off of them. And the aircraft of choice, these new super carriers, is the Lockheed Martin F-35B Lightning II jets. These aircraft were chosen in particular because, well, first and foremost, they are the most advanced fighter jets in the world, but currently the only 5th generation fighter jets around. They have a top speed of Mach 1.6, about 1,200 miles an hour. You'll fly to height of up to 50,000 feet, and all whilst doing this, thanks to their stealth superstructure, can remain completely hidden from enemy detection. But the main reason we went for the F-35Bs as the aircraft of choice is because they also operate with a system on board known as STOVL, or STOVL. This stands for Short Takeoff and Vertical Landing. What it means is when the aircraft want to take off, they don't need a very long run-up. All they really require is that ski ramp you can see up the front of her. But coming to land is a completely different ballgame, especially with these aircraft carriers. 280 metres isn't very long, especially when you compare it to something like Gatwick or Heathrow, for example. So with those aircraft, to avoid them from touching down the far end and falling off the front, they have to land vertically, not like our old Harrier jump jets used to, or modern day helicopters would. So that's the reason we went for the F-35Bs as the aircraft of choice. So as you can tell, folks, we're moving away from the carrier quite swiftly. We are going to be coming around the corner here, and there are plenty of ships to talk about. Firstly, on the corner is HMS 7. HMS 7 painted green and blue and grey. She is a Batch 1 River class patrol ship. Been in service since the early 2000s, about 2003. She spends most of her life here in the UK, gets involved in what's known as fisheries protection, goes around and basically makes sure all the fishermen adhere to all the rules and regulations. She's also used for coastal patrols as well. Behind her, D37. D37 is HMS Duncan, one of 6 Daring class Type 45 destroyers. Now the Type 45s have been around since 2009. At the time of construction, they were the most expensive warships in the Navy, costing in excess of £1 billion each. Now the prime role for a Type 45 destroyer is for air defence. They are then designed to track and find missiles and aircraft that often fly in the skies around our fleet. To do so, these ships are quite renowned for carrying on board them probably the most sophisticated and powerful missile and aircraft tracking system fitted to any warship in the world. And most notably, it's that big grey ball you see up at the top of the tallest mast. So that's called a Samson multi-function radar system. That thing has a scanning rate of over 200 miles. meaning you can quite comfortably see from here in Portsmouth to as far away as approximately Paris. Within that range, they can then monitor over 3,000 football-sized objects travelling speeds of up to Mach 3, which of course is 3 times the speed of sound. They can then relay the information back in 3D to the clever computers on board, which can then prioritise their targets, and if a threat's detected, the ship can then launch off its own uncharted territories. Last thing you want to do is run one of them aground, so the echo stops them from doing this. So that's what she's primarily used for. As we come out of the pockets, we're now going past the Dixmude. This is a French warship. She is what's known as an amphibious assault ship and a helicopter carrier. So she's kind of like a 2-in-1 ship. She was built in 2012, it's about 200 metres long, so not quite as big as our aircraft carrier and nowhere near as expensive, costing only 451 million. The idea behind this ship is that she can carry both helicopters on her flight deck on the top, but also you would have noticed on the back of her, she had a big sort of gate almost at the stern. And what this ship can do is it can lower its back end into the water, submerging the garage that's at the back there, and then amphibious assault ships can depart from the ship and do beach landings. So that's what she is primarily designed to do. When in service, she can carry up to 450 crew, fairly lightly armed, just because she doesn't really go off to the front line as much as like destroyers and frigates do, but she does have some miniguns and auto cannons fitted to her. She's been in Portsmouth, I believe, since Sunday. I think she came in. So it's one of the 13 Duke-class Type 23 frigates. The frigates are one of the oldest classes of ship we have in the Navy. Some of them have been around since the late 1980s. Now, their primary role when these ships were first introduced was for what's known as anti-submarine warfare, or ASW for short. Basically, the frigates are submarine hunters, so what they do is they go off into hostile waters, they'll deploy that little yellow thing you see poking out the back of her, that is a sonar radar. They'll drag along behind them and hopefully that way find the submarines. However, over the past couple of years, our Navy has changed quite considerably. Mainly, it's gotten actually a lot smaller than what it once was, and because of this, the fleet has been stretched into other lines of work. And because of this, the frigates have naturally become multi-role ships that can go around the globe doing a variety of different jobs. What makes them so good at this is the array of weapons they carry on board, so they can deal with pretty much anything. And we're going to start with the weapon systems right up on the front end of the warship, most notably the big grey cannon. It's quite iconic, it's on board a lot of our warships. That thing is called a Vickers Mark 8 4.5-inch naval sea gun. That thing is capable of launching off a 22-kilogram high explosive quick fire round with pinpoint accuracy as far away as 17.1 miles. That's about as far away as Southampton is from here in Portsmouth. That means if you actually wanted to, you could swing the barrels round, aim it towards Southampton and completely level any building within the city. So we could say, for the sake of the argument, St Mary's Stadium. Behind that, the grey box with the doors on the side is the house of one of their many wave-class fast fleet tankers. The idea behind her is that she can go along and replenish warships whilst they're out on their deployments. Primarily with fuel, but also with oil, water, food, medical supplies, and sometimes ammunition as well. So they can carry extra stores for them. Unfortunately though, she is getting on a little bit. She's been around since 2000. So we do have the new Tide class tankers coming into service, and they're kind of taking over from the existing Wave class. But we don't really like to get rid of our warships straight away. What we often do is put them into what's known as a state of readiness. So she's been laid up here in Portsmouth. The crew have all gone off of her, so she hasn't got a 24/7 crew on anymore. Instead, she's just kind of sat there in standby mode. If they need to, they can get her up and running in a couple of days and back into service if needed. The likelihood is that won't be needed, and eventually she'll be removed from service, completely decommissioned, and then sold on either for scrap or to a foreign navy. So that is the likelihood with the Wave there. But anyway, folks, that is the end of the naval base. Officially marked out by the sandy-coloured round tower. We do have one of our cross-channel ferries alongside. I believe that is the Tang sat in here at the moment. She comes across from Saint-Malo in France. She comes in every Wednesday, and every Wednesday she has what's known as a lay-by day. Basically, it's a day where the ship doesn't move, just sit alongside, go through any drills and training with the crew, have a bit of downtime, and then return to service later this evening. So most cross-channel ferries have at least one day in a week where they don't really do as many manoeuvres. Anyway, leaving the commercial port behind us, going back to the Royal Navy, here on our right is the former HMS Bristol. She was the only Bristol-class destroyer to ever be built because, back in the 60s, due to defence cuts, her 3 sister ships were all scrapped on paper. However, during her lifetime in the Royal Navy, she was the escort to the aircraft carriers during the Falklands. She was also the Hong Kong guard ship for a number of years. Sadly though, she eventually found herself being decommissioned, only then to be recommissioned a few years later. If not, sit back, relax, enjoy the final trip. Also, if you want to take the opportunity to grab yourself a drink or anything from behind the bar, feel free to do so. I'll be back to talk to you in a few minutes. Structure that cranes on top of it. That there's an area known as the wharf, and that stands for the Upper Harbour Ammunition Facility. It's disappointing that warships come to get armed and disarmed. It is done over there rather than on the keyboard. But the plain and simple reason that if someone drops something, hopefully out there would do too much damage. Now the ordnance, or the weapon systems themselves, they come down from a place called Bender, which is actually right at the far end of the harbour, in amongst the bushes and trees. But it takes over from the former site of Pretty's Hard. Pretty's Hard is just here on our right, where we have a cluster of red brick buildings. Back in its heyday, that was one of the largest sites in Europe. In fact, so large, it had to be connected using a small train network. But eventually, housing grew in too close. They deemed it a bit too unsafe to have so many civilians living so close to the ordnance, and therefore they moved up to where you find it today. But it's not over, so it still remains open. It's now known as the Museum of Explosions, and it's here you can come and learn about the history of naval firepower. So very quickly, sticking on the right-hand side of us, we've also got this small island we're going to go past. You can see all the shrubbery on top. Well, that there's an area called Burrow Island, although it's known locally here in Portsmouth as Rat Island. It gets that little nickname, it's had a very gruesome past. Now, Portsmouth, many, many years ago, used to play home to thousands of Napoleonic coastal war. During the time here in Portsmouth, they were mainly forced to dig out the northern end of the harbour. But at night, they'd have to stay on board what are called hog ships. Hog ships, basically run-down warships that no longer seaworthy. Whilst on board, they were kept in some pretty awful living conditions, hardly given any food or medical attention. Therefore, it wasn't too uncommon for one or two of them to pass away at night. So rather than being left on board these hog ships, taking up valuable room, instead they would actually be rowed over pilot and dumped straight on top of it. Given no burial, mark or grave, they were literally just left on top to rot away. But eventually, Ireland became infested with so. However, the only way the Navy knew how to do it back in those days, because there was no such thing as rat poison, was to introduce it onto giant feral cats. They would send the cats on to try and scare the rats away. Unfortunately, cats were never seen again. If you've ever heard the term rats larger than cats, or rats as fat as cats, that's where it's believed to have come from. So, on that wonderful note, enjoy your lunch later. So as we move along, folks, of course, going down our left-hand side, great views of the aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth once again. We are a little bit further away than what we were a few moments ago, so we'll see the top deck a little clearer. One thing you'll notice with these aircraft carriers, Prince of Wales is the same as well, is they're currently the only aircraft carriers in the world to have adopted a twin island design. So if you look at the top, you'll notice two islands. The forward one at the front, but the ski ramp is the bridge. Where they drive the ship from, the captain sits on the ship and sail around the world. The one behind, however, the big glass window around the outside of it, is an area called Flyco, the Flight Control Centre. Basically, acts a lot like air traffic controllers at an airport, guiding fairly easily and fairly quickly moving everything on the island to remain fully operational, just as a single-island aircraft carrier. So, gives them a very good backup system. As we move away from the Queen Elizabeth, folks, we're going to stick on the left-hand side for the time being, because looking ahead of us, we're getting a great view of Portsmouth's Millennium Project. Now originally that was going to be called the Millennium Tower, but sadly due to various delays and setbacks it wasn't complete until 2005. So unable to call it the Millennium Tower, they had to rename it the Spinnaker Tower, and it also meant the subsequent build cost soon grew from £69 million and it went all the way up to £36 million. But please don't worry, it's not long. That's because the Grandad voting, the Lord Mayor of Portsmouth, decided that he would take the very first trip up the tower, the glass seating elevator located outside of one of the legs. He got about 2/3 of the way up, and then in front of Portsmouth Media, he had to sit there for about 2.5 hours being lowered down by the local fire brigade. The glass seating elevator never where it sits. It's now actually being removed at a further cost of another £2 million. You can still travel to the top using the high-speed elevator inside of one of the legs. The tower today stands at Gunwharf, total height 170 metres, making it the second tallest observation platform outside of London. Anyway, over on our right hand side, we're just going past out the town centre of Gosport. Despite being so close to water, the two are obviously separated by the harbour. So if you wanted to go from, say, Gosport on the right here, to Portsmouth just over on our left, you have to drive through the market town of Ferrum, over the hills behind us, and eventually into the city of Portsmouth. During peak time traffic, it can take up to an hour in the car. But to avoid it, we have the green white ferries, you'll see one of which is directly behind us at the moment. On board these Gosport ferries, they come out that 17-mile round trip by road, and as they advertise, it's shorter by water. sold is set date back to the time when Nelson was around. Right, ladies and gentlemen, this does now very nicely brings up the first of our two become the drop-off points. This here is Gunwharf into large shopping centre. For those of you who join us here at Gunwharf, unfortunately, but for those of you who joined at the dockyard, you have a bit of a choice to make. You can either leave here at Gunwharf to find yourself a back offer, or you can simply remain on board and take you back to the historic dockyard. It is worth noting that if you need to see you can't really join at this point later on today, it will indeed be a short back to the dockyard itself, so please bear that in mind. Either way though, it's up to you. We've been staying on departing, but we'd like to thank you all for joining us. We hope you all enjoyed yourselves. If you have, and if you wish, a small thank you can be left in the bucket as you step on the boat. On behalf of myself and the crew, thank you. Have a lovely rest of your day here.